Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us, again, we just want to say welcome. Thank you for moving along with us in this journey. This has been such a fun study. So, today we are going to do what we've been doing for the last year plus. We are going to delve into the book of Genesis. And for anyone joining us for the first time today, just to let you know what we do here at Ethos, we take the Bible seriously. We look at the context. We look at who the author is. We ask who is the audience. We look at the actual words, what they meant back then in the Hebrew. We look at how interpretations were back then from the actual people who wrote it. We look at Jewish scholarship all throughout, anything we can find that's going to bring interesting historical information to this text. We study it. And then after looking at the deeper context, we ask deeper questions of how do we apply it to today. And so we take the Bible responsibly. And so the book of Genesis, what we've done, people have asked me, how is it possible to study the book of Genesis and take 2 years? And I said, man, that's average for most Torah studies. Most Jews who study with a rabbi, if you are studying to become a rabbi, first off, this book, you would spend 2 to 5 years studying this book. You'd be looking at so many different interpretations. What I give you is what I find like to be the most interesting of all the different interpretations. And so just keep in mind, this book, by the people who wrote it, is a deeply, deeply interesting book, which they spend hours and hours and hours, years and years and years studying and trying to understand. So you are part of a journey with people from all over the world who've been looking at this book together. And so this, again, interesting, fantastic study over Genesis. So again, reminder for many of you joining, Genesis was not a history book. It was never written to essentially give us important real dates, times, names. That was never the point. It was not written as history. What it was a written response to the fears of assimilation. So they were Babylonian captives in 587 BC. Again, when your tribe is taken, your biggest fear right now is what will happen to the future generations. And so they want to pass down their rituals, their values, their understanding of their God. And so what they do is they tell the story, they combine all the wisdom teachings, all the stories. They put it all together in Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And what they do there is essentially every time you read elements of this Torah, what you're seeing is Torah is basically every person you read, every story, it's going to be Israel miniaturized. It's going to be a story about Israel. It's a story that Israel as a nation will read and they'll say, we've been through this before. What is the lesson? That's the point of Torah. That's the point. And when you get that, everything in the Bible begins to hum. You even look at the New Testament differently, right? The New Testament begins to become bigger, more interesting, fuller, I would argue. And so today we're going to look at Genesis 43, 1 through 17. Next week we'll finish 43 chapter and even delve into 44. So today, reminder again before stepping in, Joseph, the story of Joseph, not just a story about a kid with an interesting coat. It's the story of Israel, right? They go into captivity, they go into famine, brokenness. How do we hold on to hope when it seems everything is hopeless? That's the point. So here we go. We have been studying the last couple times about the idea of Joseph and his brothers. They're about to experience restoration, right? This 3-part idea of restoration, forgiveness. Forgiveness for the Jewish people comes in 3s. And so we looked at 1, 2. Today we're not going to get into the 3rd one yet because there's a bit of a buffer in between. And so today we read the buffer about the brothers who approach father and they say, we have to go back. It's time, Dad. And so essentially there's this buffer where they travel, they beg Dad to let them travel. They finally get to Joseph. There's the buffer. It's an interesting 17 verses. And so that's what we'll look at today. Because again, reading through the whole thing, we just miss some interesting stuff. So we'll read 17 today. So here we go. But hunger was severe in the land. Verse 1. And it came to pass when they finished eating the grain that they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, Go back, buy us a little food. So notice this, they run out of grain, right? They've run out of the resource they went there to get, right? So there's a moment where not a moment, it's most likely been months and months. Some have argued this could have potentially been up to 2 years, right? 2 years since they left. So really fascinating. But Judah spoke to him, saying, The man warned us repeatedly, saying, You shall not see my face if your brother is not with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you do not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, You shall not see my face if your brother is not with you. Essentially, you better bring your brother or you're not getting anything. In fact, you'll probably be imprisoned, right? And Israel said, Why have you harmed me, telling me the man that you have another brother, right? Why would you do this? And they said, The man asked about us and about our family, saying, Is your father still alive? Do you have a brother? And we told him according to these things. Could we have known that he would say, Bring your brother down? Right? How would we have known? That's basically what they're saying. And Judah said to Israel, his father, Send the lad with me, and we will get up and go, and we'll live and not die, both we and you, and also our young children, right? Dad, just believe me. I'll bring him back. We got to get the food, Dad. I'll bring him back. Verse 9, I will guarantee him from my hand. You can demand him. If I do not bring him to you and stand him up before you, I will have sinned against you forever. Right? This is very strong language here. For had we not tarried, by now we would have already returned twice. Right? So again, this idea, there's been a long period of time between here. And again, some argue up to 2 years, depending on the interpretations you read. So Israel, their father, said to them, If so, then do this. Take some of the choice products of the land in your vessels and take down to the man as a gift a little balm and a little honey, wax and lotus, pistachios and almonds. And take double the money in your hand, and the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks you shall return in your hands. Perhaps it was an error. And take your brother and get up and go to the man. And may the Almighty God grant you compassion before the man, and he will release you to your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, as I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took this gift, and they took the double the money in their hand and Benjamin, and they got up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the overseer of the house, Bring the men into the house and give orders to slaughter an animal and to prepare, for the men will eat with me at lunch. And the man did as Joseph had said, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Okay, so now the fun part. Let's dig in. Let's look at these verses and different words and different concepts, different interpretations. This is going to be fun. So here we go. Verse 1, But the hunger was severe in the land, right? Joseph, it's interesting here. Joseph is aware, right? He is in Egypt, right? And we talked about this last week. Interesting that it's Egypt that God chooses to be generous to, right? Not Israel. Why? Well, I guess that's why the story is of course talking about captivity. Right? They're in captivity, right? They're in Babylon. So this is, of course, they're going to be in captivity. They're going to need to go to captivity. But it's an interesting twist on a story, right? So again, Joseph, he's aware that the tribes around him, not only his own people, but the tribes around him, there's a need for food, right? There's a need to heal the brokenness in the land. He is aware of this. And I find this interesting. Peter N. says this, Joseph is part of the elite class, a class of people with resources. What makes Joseph different is that he is aware of the hunger and willing to share the resources he has. I thought about this one when I read this from Peter. What should we do with our resources, right? When there's a need specifically, right? According to Judaism, the people who wrote this piece, wealth and resources are to be shared, not hoarded. We live in a culture right now that is all about hoarding, right? We don't like to give. We like to store, stack, and then keep to ourselves. Judaism never did this. Judaism was always in the business of sharing. And so even in Leviticus, this is in the very identity, even as an agrarian society. Notice this in Leviticus 23:22. It says this, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Essentially, don't totally strip the area of all the food there. Reap, but there's always leftovers, right? There's always stuff that's missed. And so it says, leave them for the poor and the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. Notice this. It's not saying, hey, make these people work for their food. Right? They need to do something if they want something, right? No, it's this idea that there are poor people in the land. There are people who are needy. There are people who don't have the land or the resources you do. And so leave strips, leave some food there for them, right? Built deep into Judaism, again, is this idea that we help others, right? It's required of them to actually give and help those in need. And so what an interesting idea that for Jewish people, the idea was be aware of the need and give, right? Be aware of the need and share. And it's weird to me. It's really interesting. When I read like Shakespeare and The Merchant of Venice, sometimes Judaism has gone the wrong direction. Right? We have this idea that Jewish people hoard, right? Jewish people are stingy, they're greedy, they're this, that. And it's fascinating to me that the truth is Judaism, the very principles of Judaism, and yes, sometimes the nation has moved in the wrong directions, just like any nation might. But the deep in their identity has always been the idea that you give, you share, right? You help those in need. You are the very opposite of stingy. You're actually generous. Right? You become generous. Oh, how different the Merchant of Venice would have been had people understood this about Judaism, right? Really fascinating. 2-4. And it came to pass when they finished eating the grain that they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. But Judah spoke to them, saying, the man warned us repeatedly, saying, you shall not see my face if your brother is not with you. Basically, don't come to me unless you got your brother. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy the food. Interesting here, Israel, Jacob, he's putting this off, right? He's been waiting, some again, 2 years, maybe 6 months. The hunger, though, has grown deep in his tribe. They are out of food, right? They are at a point of desperation. And I think the idea here, sometimes desperation can be a turning point for us, can't it? I don't know if this has ever happened to you. It's happened to me before. You didn't want to make the decision, right? And you waited until things were bad enough, and then you had to deal with it, right? Desperation can sometimes be a friend in these moments. It can actually save your life. I have a friend, she said, I had terrible stomach aches. She did. She had terrible stomach aches for a couple days. She was like bent over, crying, screaming. And she's like, it's going to pass. I hate going to the doctor. I hate it. But it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And she said, finally, she felt so bad. She was actually puking. But it wasn't like a flu-like symptom. It was something different. She could just feel it. And she said, finally, after she's on the floor, can barely move, she realized, I am in desperate need of help. And so she went to the ER. And when she got to the ER and the medics looked over, they said, whoa, this is serious. They took her immediately to get an x-ray, and they found out her appendix was about to erupt. Her appendix, if it had erupted, they told her there could be severe issues, even death. And so for her, they said, you're very lucky that you came when you did. This thing was about to erupt. It was in bad shape, they told her after the surgery. Sometimes desperation can be a friend. Sometimes desperation can be a gift that finally pushes you to go get the help you need. Some of us call that rock bottom, right? But for some of us, It's the kicking, it's the turning point, right? That finally pushes us to get the help we need. Verses 5-8. But if you do not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, you shall not see my face if your brother is not with you. And Israel said, why have you harmed me by telling the man that you have another brother? They said, the man asked about us and about our family, saying, is your father still alive? Do you have a brother? And we told him according to these words. Could we have known what he would have said? Bring your brother down. And Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will get up and go, and we will live and not die, both we and you, and also our young children. Notice this. Judah here, he becomes kind of the voice of reason, right? We cannot wait. We have to go now, Dad, right? This takes, again, a lot of trust, right? We've talked about trust in the past, but notice also the young generation here. If we don't do something now, the future generations of our tribe, they will be no more, right? And again, this is Israel talking about their time in Babylon. Keep that in mind. If we don't start shifting things, if we don't tell our story, if we don't remind them who we are and who we aren't, if we don't start doing the rituals where our values and the feast days and all these things, if we don't start doing these things, we will have no Judaism when we finally leave Babylon, right? We have to help so that we have to take a stand right now, right? If we don't move now, our future generations will suffer. That's what they're saying. And it's interesting to me right now. We live in a time right now, right? If we don't stop using our natural resources the way we are, they're not going to be around for our kids. What if the next future generations, we destroy so much of the land that there's really not much left? Are we going to be living in bubbles? I have no idea. But it's time to do something now so that future generations have something later, right? Animals, I think if we go to the zoo, we see different animals all around us, but isn't it sad to think animals are going extinct by the year? Every year there's another species gets added to the list. If we don't stop the censorship, the racism, all these different things, if we don't stand up now, we will lose our voice later. If we don't stand up now, the future generations are going to struggle. And this is the heart of what's going on here. If we don't make our move, if we don't do the thing now, we won't have a voice. We won't have a tribe left to leave when we're finally given our freedom, right? There won't be an exodus because there won't be a tribe. That's the story, right? That's the message here. Notice this, verses 9 and 10. I will guarantee him. From my hand you can demand him. If I do not bring him to you and stand him up before you, I have sinned against you forever. For had we not tarried, by now we would have already returned twice. Again, reminder, we kind of waited a while, Dad, right? We took a while. We took a little too long. But notice this here. Judah takes responsibility, right? He places the weight of the consequences on his own shoulders. And for me, this one struck not necessarily the Jewish interpretations as much as just my own thought about leadership. When I read that, I thought leaders, right? Leaders, they accept the consequences of their actions. They accept the consequences of their policies. They accept the consequences. Real leaders take on those things rather than simply just look to blame everyone else for it. Real leadership, it takes on those consequences. And this is what you see with the son here. He takes down that role. He says, I'll take on the consequences. And again, so cool in regard to leadership. Verses 11 through 12. For Israel, their father said to them, if so, then do this. Take some of the choice products of the land in your vessels and take down to this man as a gift a little balm and a little honey, wax and lotus, pistachios and almonds, and take double the money in your hands, and the money that was returned in the mouth of the sacks you shall return in your hands. Perhaps it was an error, right? Basically, take with you a gift. Bring what we can to the table. And yes, Leo and I were joking about this. The table, I love the metaphor of the table. Rabbi Ralph Messier, he says this, Judaism is a tribe centered around the table. During feasts, families will bring small offerings of what they have. When enough family comes together, there is always more than enough. And if any of you have ever had the privilege to be a part of any kind of potluck, right? Potlucks, I used to, as a kid, hate church potlucks. But when I think about it now, it's kind of it's pretty miraculous, really. You have all these people who come together and they bring one dish, just one dish. But at the end of the potluck, here's the thing. If you go into the kitchen at the end of the potluck, what you'll notice is there is tons of food left. Did the food multiply? In Judaism, there's a joke about feasts. And this is where the story that you're about to hear again will make sense to you. In Judaism, whenever they had feast days and they came together, people would bring food. They'd bring a dish. And the joke has always been in Judaism, when we bring the food for Passover, for Feast of Unleavened Bread, for booths, whatever the feast day was, watch me now. The idea here, the joke is, at the end of the night, they will look on the table and they'll say this, the food has multiplied. Right? The food has multiplied. And so when you see this story, I know you know what story I'm about to talk about when you see this picture. The 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Somehow they feed 5,000 men, right? And that's just referring to men alone, right? Women and children, at least 15,000. Right? That's a lot. That's a lot of people. Did this literally happen or not? I don't know. I don't really care. That's not the point of it, right? The point is, when you come together and you bring your resources, the Jewish community believed that there's something beautiful and miraculous that happens. When people come together, when community comes together and gives what they have, the miraculous math just flips upside down. Right? Math turns in on itself, right? It doesn't make sense, but you have all this food left over, right? How did this happen at potluck? We don't know, right? It just did, because it's miraculous what happens when people come together. There is so much more. A friend of mine, Dan, he lives in Northern California, and he told me that when they had these fires, he said he watched as the fire was jumping from home to home, and he sprayed water around his home, and he was just praying that somehow his family, their house would stand. And then he saw the flame flip onto his home. His family had already left down the hill. But he finally realized, my house is going to burn. And he hopped in the Jeep. And he and his friend took off down the hill. And he came back a day later, and the home was destroyed. Ashes. He said everything they had that they couldn't fit into their van earlier was lost. Everything. He said they were devastated. And so in their desperation, Dan told me, he said, you know what though? In our desperation, our faith community, the surrounding community there, and other communities around the country, he said they showed up. So they started putting together donations and drives for the different families that have lost so much. They ended up renting a home just down the hill a little ways. And he said, every day someone came with food. Every day people came with clothes and toys for the kids and books and so many things. He said it was incredible how much they acquired during that time. He said they had a home filled with nothing. He said by the time it was ready to move out of that rental, he said they had a full home that they had to move. They had nothing. And yet they needed to hire a U-Haul to haul it all to the home that they had built. They had built for them. Think about that. From community. I was able to call him this week, and I asked him some questions, and here's what I wrote down from the quote he gave me. He said, and again, this is just a little piece of the things he told me, but he said, the outpouring of love and support from our community broke my heart. They were love incarnate. They rallied together, and honestly, everything we lost, we've gained 2 times over. I literally have no room in my freezer anymore because of the crazy amounts of food they gave us. He had so much, he was actually storing it in the freezer. Right? He had so much food. Think about this. Joseph's brothers, they go to Egypt with this value in mind, right? They bring the food and the balm and all this stuff with them. They bring all of it because here's the thing, blessings will multiply. They understood this concept. It's deeply ingrained in Jewish culture. And so instead of simply getting food back, they inherit large swaths of land, and we'll get to that later, and fertile place for their people, right? Safety for the future generations. The 5 loaves story, in comparison, it looks pretty small now compared to this, right? What they have that they bring as gifts, it more than triples, quadruples, right? 10, 20, 30, 50 times what they brought multiplies because they bring the gift. They bring what they have. It's beautiful. Let's finish off. 14 and 15. And may the Almighty God grant you compassion before the man. Again, compassion from our enemies. Again, an interesting idea. And he will release to you your older brother and Benjamin. And as for me, as I have bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took his gift and they took double the money. By the way, isn't it interesting? The other brother, we don't hear about, right? It's an interesting point. We don't hear about him. What's he doing? What's he been up to? Another interesting take on it. Did it literally happen or not? 2 years away and you just left him for dead? Interesting. Again, the story of Joseph repeated backwards, right? Anyways, so the man took his gift and they took double the money in their hand and Benjamin, and they got up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. So they go with a deep belief God's going to provide, right? And the blessings are going to multiply. They understood this. And then 16 and 17, notice this. He says, he sees Benjamin, he sees this, and he says, bring the men into the house. Give orders to slaughter an animal. By the way, when you slaughtered an animal, this is not just going to feed he and his brothers. I want you to understand this. Anyone that's ever had any connection to like slaughtering a cow and then having all the meat left over, you end up it's so much food, right? This would have fed a village, right? So understand this. This is a celebration. He's literally saying, now I'm going to celebrate with them. And I'm going to bring other people in. More than likely, it would have been his family, which would have been pretty big by then, right? He's saying, we're going to celebrate together. The blessings, they begin here, right? They begin to multiply. So Joseph, again, being Jewish, understands the need here. I'm going to bring those people in. So good. And so this is, of course, going to bring us into the restoration moment, the third moment, right? The third element of forgiveness. We'll discuss that next week. But man, I hope you enjoyed this. There was a lot of good stuff here this week. So good, right? So many good things. Anyways, how do we take it home? I thought about this one. How do we take it home? I thought this is a good point right now in our culture right now. How do we learn to be generous? Right? I think it's something that we have to work at sometimes. How do we learn to be generous? Joshua Becker, speaker and writer for The Economist, he wrote some really interesting ideas I wanted to share with you today. He said, number one, consider the benefits. If you want to be generous, consider the benefits. Generous people, they report being happier, healthier, more satisfied with life, right? Generosity produces within us a sense we're capable of making a difference. Being generous actually does something for our health and our happiness. Keeping that in mind makes it easier to begin to start being generous. Number two, start small. He says this, if you've never given away money, start by giving away something small, $1. And if you're embarrassed to give just $1, don't be, he says. You've got nothing to worry about. There are plenty of charities online that allow you to give with your credit card. You'll never cross paths. He says, start small and then begin to build. And he says, what you'll notice is as you give, oftentimes you get back. But he said that's not the point. Start small. Start small, and as you get more, continue. Make it a habit. Number 3, fund something you're passionate about. I liked this idea. Asking the question, what is it you're passionate about? Right? What do you enjoy? Is it the environment, poverty, religion, right? Expanding on the Bible, sharing with people the beauties of the Bible and the concepts. Maybe it's world peace, child nutrition, whatever it is. Identify what those passions are. Align your generosity with those things, and you will be happy. That's what he says. Number 4, find a person you believe in. I really like this idea. If you find that you are more easily motivated and shaped by the people in your life rather than organizations and causes, take time. Notice the people around you that you admire, you enjoy being around, you enjoy hearing. Invest in those people, right? Find those people, invest in them. And then number 5, and by the way, thank you so much for investing in what we do at Ethos. For so many of you, it means the world to me. Some of you have been with us for 5, 6 years now, and you've continued to give and support what we do. And I have to tell you, knowing that you have trusted us to continue sharing and giving you quality content, it means the world to me. And so knowing that some of you, we have been that person that you believe in, I just want to tell you on the behalf of Leo and me and the rest of the team, it means a lot to us that you have trusted us with that. It is with your support and resources. It means the world to us. And we will continue doing everything we can to continue giving quality content and research. Lastly, spend time with people in need. I really like this. One of the most effective anecdotes for non-generosity is to make space in your life for people who actually need help, right? After all, he says, after all, it is a very small step to go from knowing somebody in need to helping someone in need, right? If you know someone that needs help, you can find out what they actually need, right? One time I remember meeting a guy, he was homeless in Orange County. And I remember asking him, hey, can I get you some food? Can I do this or that? And he's like, man, I get 4 square meals a day. He said, you know what I could really need? What I really could use? He said, I could use a couple pair of socks. I was like, I would not have thought about socks. You need socks? He said, yeah, I could really use a pair. And so I went with him and bought him some socks. And he said, thank you so much. I really needed a new pair. You don't know how much this means to me. Getting to know the people you're actually supporting, so important. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, this one felt really good today. They all do, but this one felt very good, very positive. So many cool concepts here. As always, after we just talked about generosity, consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. Consider giving, supporting what we do. Your generous donations really do make a difference. And as always, hit that subscribe button, share this with friends. Folks, we have done almost 2 years of a study in Genesis. That is worth sharing and bragging about. You have gone through some pretty deep study. You are more of an expert on the book of Genesis than the majority of people out there. That is pretty cool. Everyone, I love you. Take care, and I'll see you next week when we delve into the rest of this chapter. Talk to you soon.